And good evening, depending where you are. I'm very glad that you decided to spend this 1 hour with us. And for the beginning, I just wanted to introduce very shortly our association, which was a Polish Green Roof Association. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Marta Weber-Siwirska, and I am the chairwoman of Polish Green Roof Association. Our association is quite young. We can say that we are a teenager because we were established in 2009. And we have, in our association, there are researchers, designers, contractors, architects, landscape architects, municipality workers, and many others. Among our members, there are representatives from 6 universities, and also we have supporting members. The logo of all of them you can see on this slide, and this one of our supporting member is sponsor of today's event, Pszczelarium. So once again, I'm very glad to welcome you on our webinar. And now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Jan Łukaszkiewicz from Warsaw University of Environmental.
To ja nie słyszę.
Yes, hello everyone. Welcome you, and Marta, thank you for introduction. And first, my step is to share with you with my screen, with my presentation, and hope I will do that. So on desktop, I will share with you. Then I will switch on the presentation. Perhaps it's the best way.
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Yeah.
And now it's full screen.
Perfect. Yes. So, yes, not to taking long time, my topic for today is to present some honeymoon plants connected to Polish urban landscape. So as you probably would orientate, it's hard to present in general the bulk of such plants. There are many of them, a lot of them. So I have decided to choose some maybe interesting and quite connected to Polish landscape plants, which are more or less traditional too. And also they appear in urban landscape in cities. And for some reasons, they may be used also on green roofs, as I have, together with Marta, represent here also Polish Green Roof Association, which I'm the member of. So let's go. One of my favorite group of plants among woody plants, I mean trees and shrubs, there are fruit trees, and they play in fact in cities quite important role. Maybe they are sometimes underestimated, but in fact their meaning and presence is important, and especially important for this reason, as we are concerning honeymoon plants and pollinators and the connection between insects and plants. So despite of their aesthetics and really nice view, especially during this springtime when they are blooming, and so they are so ornamental, they got this habitat and wildlife enchants they enchant pollination processes, especially when they are blooming, of course. So fruit trees, apples, cherries, plums, and pears. So groups of species like Malus, Prunus, Pyrrhus, They are all possible to be met in urban landscapes. And as you can see here, they got so big variety of colors when they are during the springtime. When in general, we need to remember that they got quite different periods of blooming seasons. So more or less, Prunus starts first at the very beginning of spring, even in March and April, and then follows Malus and Pyrrhus, which means plums are first, cherries and apples next, and pears very often at the end. So all the second half of April and the beginning of May, they are blooming, in fact, but plums even can start in March. Yeah, and here just some other locations and options when we can meet fruit trees in the city. So also along streets and roads, they got quite significant meaning. Also technical, also as a barriers, visual barriers, and other. Connecting this to this biological meaning gives us a very interesting group of plants for application in urban landscape from the point of view of honeymoon plants also. The second species I would like to introduce here is Robinia pseudoacacia or honey locust. The name suggests the meaning of this, the great meaning of this species for honeymoon plants, as a honeymoon plants. So we can meet or find this tree in many locations and in the cities also, especially when the honey locust is quite applicable along streets, along roads, and in many locations where the site conditions are quite offensive for other species. And yes, it's a very honey producing tree. And as you can see here, flowers are so attractive for bees. And this feature was in the past quite well known for our ancestors. And they used the rows or even alleys of Robinias, honey locusts along roads. In location quite nearby of apiaries. So bees from apiaries can reach the rows of such Robinia pseudoacacia trees, and in this way they would produce from this their pollen very, very nice honey. So this was the feature of honey locust in the past, and even today they are applicable in this way. So to locate a group or row of such trees on a nearby apiary improves the production of honey in the season when they are blooming in May. And of course, very typical for Polish landscape is lime, the common lime, and other species I listed here. Tilia cordata is the common lime, but we got also in Poland Tilia flatyphyllos and foreign species Tilia uchlora, europea, tomentosa, and even Tilia insularis, which is the most attractive for bees during the season of blooming. In this year, all species of limes were so densely covered with flowers. These photos are from this year, so they were producing a lot of them. I don't know the reason why they were so intensively blooming during this June and July period when they are blooming, in fact. But it was so intensive that many people, even not familiar with this feature, were aware that there is something about this fact. So this tree is also very important for the reason of pollinators, for honeymoon, as a honeymoon plant, and it was also connected to the name of one kind of honey. It was connected to the name of the tree. We call it lipcowy miód, lipcowy, or honey from July. In the tradition of Poland, it's strongly connected to this honey producing process in the summer. And of course, in cities, in urban landscape, they were widely possible to be found out everywhere, along streets, in parks, and gardens. It's a huge, big tree, and quite typical to Polish landscape, and those which were introduced to our landscape from abroad, they are also quite common today. Another group of woody plants which are so attractive to bees, they are called lilacs. We call them bzy lilaki. But in respect of another species which is called bez in Polish, lilacs are a different group. But this second I will show in the next step. So of course, lilacs are connected to spring blooming time, and they were so ornamental that many years ago they were strongly connected to Polish culture, to romantic even vision of the springtime, when they are usually starts in the mid of May. And so they are connected to the symbol of love, and usually used in wedding ceremonies too. Here we got the common lilac, and below is the Syringa meyeri. It's different species, very important for bees, and quite intensively fragrant. It's fragranted when it's blooming. So these are shrubs, in fact, not trees, but they grow quite slowly. And old specimens find in urban areas along gardens and streets might look like here on the pictures. They are so huge and beautiful, covered with flowers when they are blooming. So super ornamental, and also important for biocenotic reasons. And this second plant is elderberry. We call it bez czarny or Sambucus nigra. Elderberry is also the woody plant, but so different from lilacs, and also it's strongly connected to Polish culture, and it's rather not as ornamental as lilacs, but it appears sometimes simultaneously in many locations, and it stays when it's possible. So here is the huge specimen nearby one of blocks of flats, residential blocks in Warsaw. It's over 5 or even over 5 meters tall, and as you can see here, covered with characteristic whitish flowers, quite attractive for bees. And after they turn into blackberries, so that's why it's nigra. And we know about many also culinary values, but also medical values of this plant. After all, next are the group I would like just mentioned, roses. And here is the one of feature of roses I admire the most. So it's the roses of those species which are the climbing roses. Climbing roses are so beautiful when they covered walls, fences, vertical barriers, and they produce very often many flowers. These flowers attract bees during the end of May and June, beginning of June. So one such plant can introduce so big biodiversity than hard to imagine how many other plants would be placed instead of this one specimen which is so huge and ornamental. I really admire this kind of roses, as they can be applicable in many locations in cities, and even along walls when they are attached to them. They would like to look as on this picture here. Also, they may be used, roses in general, as covering plants on green roofs when they are growing not so intensively on the height, but rather spread along and cover the ground. In this fact, the substrate they are growing in. So this picture is taken in the mid of September, and they are still blooming. Many flowers out there, and still they are attractive visually too. So of course they may attract insects and bees, of course, even during beginning of autumn. And herbaceous plants, perennials and annuals, they create so many options in cities. So they may be arranged in monocultures, like here those beds with Echinacea and Rudbeckia plants. You can see here butterflies, but also bees. They prefer to use pollens from such flowers, and they are so beautiful to use them as the annual summer plants. Yes, I'm following. So here is another option, but on green roofs we can use also another different species, many of them, sedums, salvias, anemones, as on those pictures from the green roof of Warsaw University, the language faculty building. And finally, dandelion, Taraxacum officinale, which covers in many locations quite unusually the lawns and green areas and green belts around streets and roads. So of course it got a lot of the meaning for bees, as on the picture seen here. So its presence increased biodiversity, where in location, especially in location where there is hard to introduce another plants more ornamental in way of gardening. White clover, another plant which is quite connected to Polish landscape, Trifolium repens. So we can meet it on big lawns in parks and gardens, urban parks and gardens. So this plant also much attracting pollinators like bees and butterflies too. And finally, because of that, and we need to somehow connect it to green roofs. There are reports that there is a growing number. Each city in Poland, in Warsaw, of course, too. There is increasing number of locations when they are apiaries installed and introduced on many shopping malls, public buildings, offices, buildings, and so on. So here is only the picture I found because I couldn't reach there. But in fact, yes, the number of apiaries increases everywhere. And here is this one example of location of apiary on a big, extensive green roofs of shopping mall Arcadia Westfield north of Warsaw. And yes, it's marked here with the red ring. We can see the location of the apiary among the other contraptions on this roof. So honeymoon plants, as I mentioned, it's a great variety of species. I would like to present much more of them today, but I chose those representatives for you today as they are, I believe, the most characteristical for Polish landscape and connected to this topic of this webinar. Despite of their aesthetic values, they got also those plants, the woody and herbaceous plants. This meaning, this biodiversity meaning. So they are so valuable, and the most important thing, all plants, especially those which are introduced to the urban landscape, needs the maintenance. So we may increase their presence and their effectiveness, but as usual, they need the maintenance, and this is the feature, important key role of the city gardeners, landscape architects to think about that. And when we reach this balance, they will produce this effect of ornamental and biodiversity effect for us finally. So thank you very much. I hope I not consumed too much time, and this is my topic for you for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jan, very much. In fact, you cross a little bit your time, a little bit, but this is very difficult academia for university people to stay in 10 minutes because usually we have lectures much longer. But thank you very much for going us through most popular species in Poland. Now I would like you introduce Kamil Baj from Pszczelarium. Oh, this is your presentation already, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. And if you have any question, please type them in a chat, but please use English language because we have international audience today. Okay, so thank you. I giving the floor to you, Kamil.
Okay, so let me just start again over. Okay, so I've been doing beekeeping for almost 30 years now. This is actually, I didn't know that Jan would mention Arcadia City shopping mall, but this is actually the picture from that very roof, not the same exact location, because originally the hives were placed on the different part of the rooftop. But 30 years gave me a lot of knowledge, experience, and a lot of things I can compare, even urban beekeeping and to countryside beekeeping, very traditional beekeeping. I was mostly a hobby beekeeper throughout those 30 years, but for 10 years I've been doing also urban beekeeping as a side adventure, let's say, that grew to a substantial size. We are now as a pszczelarium present in more than 40 cities, not necessarily cities all the time, but near the cities, generally urbanized areas. So more than 40 cities with more than, I think, 130 locations. So basically these are small locations, around 4 hives per hive. This is not traditional beekeeping. We're doing it's a different kind of beekeeping. A lot of different things can happen, and a lot of more. We more focus on the well-being of bees and well-being of the people. So I would like just to take your consideration just for a moment on the biology of bees. So what you can see here is the honeycomb. It's the main asset of the honeybees. So they would collect nectar from the environment around the hive. They would also collect pollen. Those balls things come from flowers. They would store it inside the hive or inside any place they would occupy. They would store it in the honeycombs, and they would also store it for later use and for, let's say, the current use. So what you see, these brown dots are the cells full of pollen, and the rest of the honeycomb is uncapped and it's full of honey. And I don't know if you can imagine, but the bees and the honeybees would collect around 100 kilograms of honey per year, and around 30 kilograms of pollen per year. And we basically, beekeepers would take the surplus of, let's say, that number in simple terms. So we only collect surplus, and the bees would be consuming the most of what they collect. Of course, it's not everything they collect from the environment. Water, sap to make propolis from, would also be some things they would bring to the hive. Anyway, let's focus on honey for most of the time. You can see that average honey yield in Poland is usually around 15 to 17 kilograms per hive, and it's the stationary hives, so the hives that are not moved around. So they would stay in the same location for the whole season, for the whole year, and I collect even less in the countryside and in the woodlands where we have stationary hives in the Mazovia region in Poland. We collect even less. It's not good. I mean, for the beekeeper, it's definitely not good, but it tells something more than it's not the technique of the beekeeper. It tells something also about the environment. It's usually agriculture, or in the woodlands, there's no agriculture, but still the woodlands are quite, bare of any nectar flowing plants usually, unfortunately. On the contrary, we have urban hives where every single year we get more honey on average than we get from the countryside, and even more than average Polish beekeepers do. So we usually tend to get around 30 kilograms per hive per year, which is really good number. Almost twice as much as Polish average. This year was a record year. At least in Warsaw, we had more than 40 kilograms per hive. The honey flow was magnificent this year. Of course, there are years where we have less than 30, around 23, 24 also happens. So let's say average is 30. And what does it tell for me as a beekeeper? Because the techniques the same, honeybees are the same, hives are the same. So it basically tells about the environment or the density of hives in the environment around the location. So these are two factors that mostly impact the honey flow to the hive. And I always deemed urban environment to be more, let's say, attractive for the honeybees from the very beginning. So when you imagine that the bees can collect 100 kilograms, okay, it may be a big number, but they would they would fly around hive for most intensively in a radius of 1.5 kilometers. They would go also up to 3 kilometers, where you have on the map this dashed line. This is the radius of 3 kilometers, but not necessarily only this radius. They would even go further, up to 5 kilometers from the hive. When they don't find anything attractive closer to the hive, they would go even further. And at 1 year, we even were able to identify that the bees from the almost very center of Warsaw collected rapeseed honey. So they needed to fly around 6 to 7 kilometers from the hive to collect this very attractive forage for them. At the same time, of course, they didn't find anything attractive closer to them, and they would collect even so much honey that we collected rapeseed honey. Why do we know this was the rapeseed honey? Because we do something which I called basic monitoring of the environment around, and it's based on visual analysis of what's in the sample of honey. So basically, it's the outcome of this analysis. You can see that, for example, 53% of pollen inside the honey sample was a rapeseed pollen. So you can estimate around 50% of nectar was from rapeseed. And you can see there are many other species of plants, even let's say even clover at the somewhere near zero, but it was identified. The other example is a sample from acacia honey. Acacia is actually not very present in honey, at least in urban areas. So either the nectar dries very fast, or it's not so much acacia actually in the city. But you can see acacia, horse chestnut, and so on. But look how many different species are there. At the very bottom of the table, there are 30% of all the pollen from species that were not identified in this analysis. So this is like a very basic analysis of the honey. An example of how an expert on analysis of pollen would see the honey. This is an example of rapeseed honey. This is an example of linden honey or lime tree honey, whatever you wish. Isn't it beautiful? It is really beautiful. So you can differ different species of plants by the size, the shape, the color of the pollen in the sample of honey. Right. So what we already also tested, and you can also see, this is kind of like basic monitoring also of the environment around, is so-called contaminants. This could be like hydrocarbons or heavy metals, so-called heavy metals like lead or cadmium. So we also tested very intensively honey for those substances, and not to, I'm not cherry picking. This was always, below even the levels that laboratory tests could even examine, or the levels were so low that it was like 10-fold or dozen or so fold below acceptable levels for food. So the honey from either the city or the countryside was actually very pure. There was no difference, no contaminants of honey at least from the city. So we maybe thought, okay, if the city is contaminated, the honey is not, so maybe the bees would be contaminated. And we compared even the honeybees. In 2018, the Warsaw University did the testing, and what basically they said that the city environment is not harmful for the honeybees because they didn't find anything worth our disturbance, right, about the honeybees. And they tested for pesticides, they tested for heavy metals, so there was no reason to say the city is harmful for the honeybees. You may think why the honey is so pure. I'm showing here the example of a study made by University of Lublin, where they basically said bees have extraordinary ability to remove metals from nectar when converting nectar into honey. So basically, the honey would, despite the fact wherever would the hive stand, the bees would probably always produce really clear and honey without contaminants. But going back to the pollen, you can see the pollen is quite different than nectar flow, and it's brought to the hive on the legs of the honeybee. You can see this pollen grains on the back legs of the honeybee, and it's brought raw, let's say, into the hive. It's mixed with the bees, let's say, saliva, but basically it's like the raw substance they bring, and it can be actually better usage in the analysis of the monitoring of contaminants in the environment around the hive, around the location. For example, you can see those two from this scientific paper, those two locations, one in Lublin, one in Poznań, and you can see the product part of the graph. You can see that honey has substantially lower levels of examined contaminants than pollen. So what I would basically want to finish with is that honey is not quite good, let's say, indicator of contaminants. It's quite a good indicator of plants biodiversity, but for contaminants, probably pollen would be better. And now I would turn to Laetitia. She will discuss more on the analysis of pollen with really advanced methods using DNA. Right? Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. And I just don't want to waste the time, so I would like to invite Laetitia Boels for her presentation. So what we can learn from honey, no, not from bees, or okay, so the floor
from pollen, actually.
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen well?
Yes, we can.
So hi, I'm Laetitia. I'm an ecologist with a specialization in nature and forest conservation. And I work as a biodiversity consultant at Biodiversity, which is a Belgian-based company. So since more than 10 years, we support companies and public authorities to create value for all stakeholders through collaborative models that combine nature and technology, so collaboration with the bees and with the people. I will shortly go back to how dependent we are on nature. So we are dependent on it, on its ecosystem services for food, medicine, energy, clean air and water, carbon sequestration, security from natural disaster, as well as recreation and cultural inspiration. If you take pollinators like bees, 75% of the cultivated crops for human food depend on them. And then it's also important to highlight that 55% of the global GDP is dependent on nature. Yet, we are depleting the natural resources and putting our economy and most importantly, our humanity at risk. There is, in average, a decline of 70% in species populations since 1970. 1 million plants and animals are threatened with extinction, and more than 60% of the EU soils are unhealthy and degrading. So it's no surprise that the Global Risk Report from the World Economic Forum lists here the biodiversity loss as a key risk facing our economies in the near future. There are 5 causes to the biodiversity decline. In addition to the climate change, which we are quite well aware of, there is also the land use change, so the habitat loss, which is one of the most important drivers of biodiversity loss. If you think of the road construction, deforestation, urbanization, and intensive agriculture, all these actions result in habitat destruction and fragmentation, making it increasingly difficult for species to survive and thrive in their natural environments. There is also the overexploitation of resources, the pollution, and the invasive species. So business and biodiversity are related. Actually, including biodiversity data in your business becomes a necessity for business resilience regarding regulatory and ESG disclosure requirements, also because of increased scrutiny from investors, raising awareness from the consumers, and then also net zero and nature positive goals, or even innovation and new business models. Yet, surprisingly today, there is no solution that effectively monitor these issues with a holistic approach at large scale. So that's where we come in, using the bees and the technology to provide data-driven insights and recommendation for action. Biodiversity can be seen as the next carbon for data disclosure. Our tool to gather this valuable data is called the Biomonitoring. So the Biomonitoring works with the domestic bees, which is only one species among all the wild solitary bees that exist. We have other services with those wild solitary bees that are very important too. But here we work with the bees in order to gather data. And then with the data, the idea is to improve the environment for all pollinators. But so how does it work? So the biomonitoring involves collaborating with the domestic bees to assess the quality of their environment. Typically, if we take an average, we can say that the bees forage 1.5 kilometer radius from their hive, and so they cover an area spanning approximately 700 hectares. Within this range, they will visit billions of flowers, collecting nectar and pollen to feed themselves, but then also to provide for the rest of the colony, and so bring it back to the hive. For the biomonitoring process, we install a small device at the hive entrance, which enables us to connect a portion of the pollen that the bees bring back to the hive. The beekeeper will then gather these samples, and they will be analyzed 4 times a year. This provides detailed insights into the environmental conditions over 6 weeks periods from April to October, which is when the bees are the most active. So when analyzing the pollen samples, various parameters can be examined. There is first the biodiversity data, which is obtained through DNA analysis. And then there is also the pollution data, which can be detected in the pollen. Because the pollen is a lipid-rich substance, so it can trap the pollutants such as pesticides, trace metal elements, more specific compounds also, like, for example, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, among others. So for the pollution, it can either come from agricultural or industrial source. And through the data that is obtained, it's possible to trace the origin and measure the impact that it has on the environment, but also on human health. Then, as mentioned earlier, so we collect the data across 4 periods of 6 weeks, from April to October. And so for the diversity of plants, it provides valuable insight into the quality of the environment during each period of the year. And this enables us to identify whether specific periods of the year are lacking in floral resources. So based on all the gathered data, interpretations are made, a report is compiled, and recommendations are formulated to guide actions aimed at improving the environment. So like I said, it's not only for the domestic bees, it's also not only for pollinators, because they are all at the beginning of the entire trophic chain that follows. So if you have plants, you will attract the insects, but then in turn, you will support birds, bats, other mammals, and create a cascading effect that enhances biodiversity as a whole. Today, we work across a wide range of sectors, including real estate, smart cities, and for which I will present specific case studies right after. It's also important to mention here today that we are already present in various places in Poland. So in the north, we have had a project in Pila and Popowo with a retail banking that was aiming to offer a service to its clients specifically to improve environment through innovation and create a positive impact. More south of Poland, we worked in Katowice. We are busy with the Upsurge project, which is an initiative funded by the European Union Horizon 2020 program. And it's aimed at promoting sustainable human development through nature-based solutions. We are also in Krakow, and more to the western, we are also working with a family-owned waste management group that has environmental protection at the heart of the group's activities. So today in 2024, the impact that we have thanks to the biomonitoring is in 23 countries, with approximately 30 million bees working with us. With more than these 10 years of data, we now also started developing digital tools to have an impact on even broader scale. But let's take a closer look at the data that we gather with the help of the bees. So this is the first case study I wanted to show you today. It's a Belgian municipality that is doing biomonitoring since 10 years to monitor the quality of the environment for its citizens. For their needs, they selected to follow the next parameters, so plant diversity, metal trace elements, and pesticides. The bees are installed in 5 locations to cover the whole territory of the municipality. In the beginning, we measured some high lead concentrations in the western part of the municipality. And we also found that we had some high concentrations of pesticides and sometimes very high concentration, like here with the captain. And we could also measure through the plant diversity that there was few diversity on the site. So we started working together, and for the lead, we could see that it was coming from the ships in the port nearby. So working with the municipality, working with the port, we managed to reduce the concentration by more than 6. Then regarding the pesticides, we could trace that the captain, it was a fungicide that was used mainly on apple orchards. So we started working with the farmers through collaborative models. We did workshops with them looking for efficient alternatives that they could use in order to reduce the amount of captain that they needed to spray on their apples. And here again, it was a great success because the concentration almost reduced by 50. And finally, for the plant species, we decided with the municipality to make some seed packets of melliferous plants that were distributed to all citizens based on the results that we had from the biomonitoring. So we could make them tailor-made packets with the floral resources that were needed at special moments of the year. And we could measure that this increased by 400%. Sorry. So if we take a closer look at the data that we had here, for example, for Knokke Est, you can see that we have first some quantitative data by analyzing the pollen that shows the amount of species for each period and the evolution in time. So here you have all the data since 2019 until the beginning of this year, 2024. For each of those periods, you have the amount of plant species and then the detail of all the plant species that we found through the DNA analysis. Then we also have some more qualitative data. So we can look at the percentage of wild species that are present, because the wild species are the most interesting resource for the local fauna. You can see also in this graphic that we have species that are only considered wild, like for example, the dandelion, but you have some species that are considered wild or ornamental. And those are species of wild origin, but that are now more and more integrated by landscape architects into their designs in the garden of people. And that is very positive because it remains wild species, but that start to have aesthetical value as well. So that's very positive for biodiversity. We can see also that we have the trees for a certain portion, and these are typical results of the beginning of the year. And if we check this other graphic with the most abundant resources, it joins what Jan was saying at the beginning of the webinar. We can see that fruit trees are very important for the pollinator, with the pear and with the cherry or plums here. And then we also have some other trees like the willow, which are also a very interesting resource for the pollinator. This graphic is interesting because it shows the species that are most represented in our pollen sample. So it shows the pollen that is very useful to the bees and other pollinators in that period. It's an indicator of the variety of the food bowl, and it's important to have a diversity here and not have just one species dominating during the whole period. Eventually, still focusing on the plant diversity parameter, the biomonitoring helps identifying invasive alien species. So, as mentioned earlier, it's one of the 5 main causes of biodiversity decline. And by detecting their presence, targeted actions can be implemented in order to limit their proliferation. For example, in this case, we find still a lot of butterfly bush, which is not still too often planted in private gardens. And also, for example, the thorn apple, which is more typical of agricultural lands. Moving on to the other parameters, we have the pesticides that can be measured into the pollen. So again, with this graphic here, like with biodiversity, it's about the amount of pesticides that can be found. But then we can go further and look at the concentration of each specific pesticide and its evolution in time. For the concentration, we will check the maximum residue limit that are set by the EU. And when you are over this limit, it can be a threat for the environment, but also for human health. Here, for example, it was the case of the captain, where we had some values much higher than this limit here in red. What's interesting too is to see on which crops they can be used. And here, typically, we had apples, cherries, which were found also in the plant diversity through the DNA analysis. So links can be made between the products that we find and the diversity that is present. The idea is then to start working with the stakeholders around. So here we started working with the farmers in collective intelligence workshop, and we reduced those captain concentrations. Eventually, there are also the metal trace elements that are interesting to monitor annually to determine whether, as with the example of lead mentioned before, action is needed to address this pollution, or sometimes it can happen that it's just a one-time peak and that it does not reappear in the subsequent years. The second case study I wanted to show you today is the one of Siemens. So it's a real estate development project that wanted to create new offices in Siemensstadt, and they wanted to monitor the impact of the project on biodiversity. So for their needs, they choose to measure the plant diversity as well as the pollen nutritional content. For Siemens, we compared their results in plant biodiversity to all the other urban sites because they were categorized as a urban site and they wanted to position themselves compared to other ones. So here you can see a benchmark of their results compared to all the other urban sites on which we do some biomonitoring. Their results were good in biodiversity. And then when we pushed it a bit further with the pollen nutritional content, we could see that all indicators were in green, except for the first period of 2023 here, where isoleucine was in red. So to act upon it, we gave them some example of plants that are flowering in the first period and that contain isoleucine amino acid. And then, as a consequence, we can see here that from between the first period of 2023 and the first period of 2024, after they did those plantations, there is a huge increase. So the monitoring through the bees helped them also to valorize the actions that they undertook. So to wrap it up, the data collected through the biomonitoring can be valued at many different levels. Biodiversity and pollution data are critical components in ESG reporting, among others, and the biomonitoring provides measurable insight into a company's environmental impact, its risk management, and sustainability performance. It enables to make a baseline, take informed decisions based on the data, and then monitor the outcomes of the actions that we've taken. Thank you for listening to all of us, and feel free to ask any questions.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. That was really, I think it's not just for me so interesting. So yes, if you have any question, please, there is a time when you can ask them. Let me check, because I see that there is a discussion on chat, but there was a question, so maybe it was, let me check. Okay. So first question I see, it's probably to Kamil. How do honeybees impact wild bees, especially the increasing amount of them? So if you can answer this question.
Yeah, so those questions came from people who usually think the honeybee is a threat to wild bee species, which is simply not really, not necessarily true, I would say delicately, because no great scientist that or scientific paper, significant scientists or scientific papers that discusses threats to solitary bees or wild bees are putting honeybee as a significant threat for wild pollinators, so-called. And I'm not sure why those people are all the time referring to honeybee when somebody is discussing honeybee. Probably because it's the easiest way for them to, let's say, take care of wild pollinators, to attack, let's say, honeybee. Let's remember honeybee is the natural part of the habitat in Europe, at least. And pollinator specialists, like, for example, Princeton University professor Brian Blandford, was even surprised how little is the impact of honeybee even in America, where honeybee was introduced in some 17th century. So what are the threats to wild pollinators are agriculture, let's say, modification of land use, taking natural habitats. So I would recommend to focus, and we also do things like greening and planting. So it's hard. I understand it's hard to focus on landscape, and it's easier to focus on honeybee. But actually, some scientific papers say there may be a negative impact, and some say there is no. But please remember, in Poland, there was almost 3 million hives in late 70s or early 80s. Now we are on the, let's say, increasing number of hives, where we last year it was 2.3 million, but it's still not as much as there were. And it's the probably we need to find balance between what the environment works for honeybee and beekeepers, and probably some areas are overpopulated. But as I showed you on data and actual data, it's not cities that have the problems with honeybees. It's the countryside that has the problem with honeybees. And it's easily recognizable with the level of honey that can be collected by bees, actually, because the bees are on the front line and will be affected by the environment. And then at the very last, there will be a beekeeper, and the beekeepers tend not to put so many hives in the locations they know they would not gain, let's say, significant amount of honey, because they would simply sink into the costs, not having any profit, right? So yeah, that would be my answer.
Thank you very much for that answer. There is
I
another.
would probably be criticized, but I got used to it. Yeah.
Okay. We will see. The next question is, can existing honey beehives be used by wild bees?
Sorry, what? Once again?
Uh-huh.
Existing hives
Can
used by no, it's not possible, because wild bees are all this completely different species with completely different, let's say, functioning. Most of them don't even create clusters, don't even create families. So that's out of question. With biomonitoring or biomonitoring, we work with honeybees, right?
Yes, so with biomonitoring, it's always with the honeybees that we work. We also have another tool that is the bee hotel, and there it's with solitary bees, but that's something else. But it also enables to gather data. The idea with the biomonitoring and with the bee hotel is every time to measure the environment in order to have a positive impact on the honeybees, but also on all the other pollinators, so also on the wild bees. And actually, like you said, Camille, the most important is to have enough resources in the environment. If you have enough resources, enough flowers in the environment, you won't have competition between the wild bees and the honeybees. So often, what we want to put forward is that if you want to help the bees, be it domestic bees or wild bees, it's by planting or by stopping to mow too regularly your lawn so that you have flowers flowering again. So it's really to promote the floral resource so that all bees find what they need.
Thank you. And there is request to tell us about the impact of honeybees on the environment.
I mean, a honeybee is a natural pollinator in the environment, so it will bring, and it's a general pollinator, so it would pollinate definitely wide variety of plants. But as I said at the very beginning of my presentation, the honeybee would rather choose to pollinate flowers that she can effectively collect nectar from, and it's usually the massively blossoming trees or shrubs. And we have detected that most attractive for them and available for them as usually the trees that grows, at least in the city, it's maple, acacia, horse chestnut, linden, and at the very end of the season is the goldenrod, right? And maybe in somewhere in between May and June, it's ivy, which is not a tree. It's like a plant that grows on the sides of buildings, on the usually on the sides of the buildings. So ivy, we even collected ivy honey. There's so much ivy in the cities currently that it brings actually so big amounts of nectar that we collect honey from it. So that's the most attractive. And honeybee is definitely, at least for not maybe we shouldn't say it's an environment, but agriculture as a part of our current landscape would not be so effective without honeybee. So usually the farmers would either supply themselves with bumblebees or supply themselves with hive for better pollination of the crops.
Thank you very much. I see there was a question, but you answered that on the
chat, yeah.
Yes. So another question is about your presentation. if they will be available for participant of today's meeting or not. Do you agree to share the presentation?
Mine or Laetitia's?
Both.
Both. Yeah, sure. I think we need to reconsider it, but preliminary, I can share it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so if I'm not wrong, I don't see any other questions in a chat. But if I'm wrong, please correct me. But okay, I don't see any. So I just would like to thank you, all our speakers today, and also all participants of today's event. I send you a link with request to say us how did you get the information about today's event. Some of you already respond, so I just paste the link again on the chat. So it's just one question: if you obtain the information about today's event by email or by social media. So I would be very thankful if you could answer that question. So once again, thank you very much for today's event, and hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.